How did the bones of Arctic mammoths get violently mixed with tropical lions in caves from North America to China? Science has one explanation: a slow, creeping ice age. But that doesn't explain this. The real answer is faster, more violent, and was written down by Plato. The story of our world, as it is commonly told, is a story of gradualism. It is a slow, uninterrupted, and linear ascent from a primitive past to a complex present. This idea, known as uniformitarianism, became the central dogma of modern geology in the 19th century. Championed by the influential scientist Charles Lyell, it proposed a simple principle: the forces that shape our planet today are the same forces that have always shaped it, operating at the same slow, constant rate. The erosion of a river carving a canyon, the drift of sand building a dune, the rise and fall of land over millions of years, these were the only mechanisms of change. The past, according to this doctrine, was quiet and predictable. This principle offered an orderly alternative to the old stories of creation and destruction. It replaced narratives of deluge and fire with the mechanics of geological time. For scientists seeking to separate their work from religious explanations, uniformitarianism provided a new foundation. It enshrined the belief that the planet operates on a set of unwavering, observable laws, and that there are no exceptions. History, both human and geological, was a straight line. But as the age of exploration dawned and 19th century naturalists began to map the globe, they sent back reports that were not quiet. They described a planet that looked less like a predictable machine and more like the scene of a violent crime. The evidence they uncovered, etched into the rock of the continents, told a story of a sudden, immense catastrophe that contradicted the foundation of their new science. The Earth had a secret, a violent, chaotic past it could not entirely hide. Across Europe and North America, a strange and disturbing picture began to emerge. Geologists mapping mountain ranges found that the northwestern faces of entire chains were scoured and scarred, as if blasted by a fast-moving torrent of water filled with gravel. On the opposite, southeastern sides, they found massive deposits of what they called drift, a chaotic jumble of sand, soil, and boulders piled hundreds of feet high. These were the exact effects one would expect from a colossal flood moving from northwest to southeast. Even more mystifying were the erratics. These were gigantic boulders, many weighing thousands of tons, sitting in the middle of open country hundreds of miles from their geological point of origin. They were found on the plains of Germany, the hills of England, and the farmlands of North America. They were monoliths that could only have been moved by a force of unimaginable power. Again, the most obvious culprit was a body of water vast enough to float these stone giants across continents and deposit them when the waters receded. The evidence was consistent, widespread, and pointed to one uncomfortable conclusion: the world had been subjected to a recent, global flood of biblical proportions. For the scientific establishment of the 19th century, this was a horrifying prospect. Their project was built on creating a world safe from the superstitions of the past. To validate the central cataclysm of the Old Testament was unthinkable. It would have been a complete surrender, an admission that ancient myths held a deeper truth than their measurements. Science needed an alternative explanation, and it needed one fast. The task of inventing one fell to a Swiss naturalist named Louis Agassiz. But how could a single scientist create a theory so powerful it could explain away mountains of evidence for a global flood? Agassiz's solution was simple. He took the clues pointing to a flood and gave them new names. The deep scratches gouged into mountainsides were striations, carved by the slow passage of immense rivers of ice. The massive piles of jumbled debris were moraines, the rubble pushed along by a glacier. And the giant misplaced boulders were erratics, rafted across the land on the backs of these same glaciers. With a series of deft semantic strokes, Agassiz invented the Ice Age. It was a brilliant theoretical maneuver. It explained the evidence without a sudden catastrophe. The Ice Age was a slow, creeping process that unfolded over tens of thousands of years. It preserved the integrity of Lyell's doctrine and banished the specter of a global flood from scientific discourse. The theory was rapidly adopted, becoming the new orthodoxy. The evidence for a violent, watery cataclysm was safely buried under a thick sheet of theoretical ice. But the theory had problems from the very beginning, fatal flaws that were quietly ignored. Glaciers, like rivers, are slaves to gravity. They flow from high elevations to low elevations. They do not climb hills, they do not carve grooves up the sides of mountains, and they do not travel for thousands of miles across level continents to deposit boulders in the desert. The evidence the Ice Age was supposed to explain showed all of these impossible behaviors. The most damning evidence, however, lay hidden in the drift material itself. When 19th century paleontologists began to excavate these deposits, they found graveyards. Stuffed into fissures and caves across the world were the remains of millions of animals, packed together in a dense, fossilized mass. Inside these bone caves, skeletons of Arctic mammoths were found smashed together with temperate climate horses. Mixed in with them were the remains of tropical lions and hippopotami. Animals from different continents that never shared the same habitat were found violently crushed and dismembered in a single location. This was not the work of a slow-moving glacier. A creeping ice sheet could not have gathered animals from the tropics of Africa and the steppes of Asia and deposited them in the caves of England. This was the signature of a more powerful agent. It was the result of a massive hydraulic force that had swept across the globe, collecting, churning, and finally flushing the life of the world into the cracks and crevices of the earth. This was the evidence of the flood the Ice Age theory was designed to conceal. Orthodox science simply looked the other way. For generations, the dogma of gradualism held. Then, in 1950, a scholar named Immanuel Velikovsky published a book so threatening to the scientific establishment that they tried to destroy it before it was even released. What did he uncover that provoked such a ferocious response? Velikovsky, a historian and psychoanalyst, argued that the sacred stories of ancient cultures were not fantasies, but eyewitness accounts of actual celestial events. He proposed that the solar system had not always been the stable, predictable clockwork we see today. Within human memory, he claimed, planets like Venus and Mars had moved on erratic, unstable orbits. Venus, he argued, had been ejected from Jupiter as a massive comet. Its passage through the inner solar system brought it perilously close to Earth, triggering immense cataclysms. These near collisions, he posited, were the source of the biblical plagues, the day the sun stood still for Joshua, and the global disasters remembered in the myths of virtually every culture on Earth. The reaction from the scientific establishment was one of immediate, organized, and ferocious hostility. The campaign to silence Velikovsky was led by powerful figures in American science, most notably the Harvard astronomer Harlow Shapley. Before the book was even published, Shapley organized a boycott of the Macmillan Company's textbook division, threatening to ruin their business unless they dropped Velikovsky. The pressure was so intense that, even after Worlds in Collision became a #1 bestseller, Macmillan was forced to transfer the rights to another publisher. Its senior editor was fired for the crime of acquiring it. Velikovsky became a pariah. He was denounced in the press as a charlatan, his work ridiculed without being read. For decades, he was denied platforms to respond to his critics and was effectively blacklisted from the academic world. His true crime was interdisciplinary synthesis. The specialists of the 20th century had built high walls around their respective fields. The geologist did not speak to the mythologist. The astronomer did not speak to the historian. Each discipline held its own piece of the puzzle, but refused to look at the pieces held by others. The geologist knew of the bone caves and mass extinctions, but clung to the explanation of an ice age. The mythologist knew of the globally consistent stories of celestial chaos, but interpreted them as purely psychological artifacts. The astronomer knew the solar system had oddities, but insisted it had been a perfect clockwork for billions of years. Velikovsky walked into each of their isolated studies, gathered up their secret skeletons, and assembled the full monster in the public square for all to see. He showed that when you looked at all the evidence together, the story was one of sudden, violent, planetary catastrophe. The establishment sought to destroy him, but history has begun the slow process of his vindication. In 1950, astronomers believed Venus was a temperate planet. Velikovsky, based on his reading of ancient texts that described it as an incandescent comet, insisted it would be intensely hot. In 1962, NASA's Mariner 2 probe revealed the surface temperature of Venus to be over 800 degrees Fahrenheit. Astronomers in 1950 believed that Jupiter, a cold gas giant, should be electrically and radiologically inert. Velikovsky, based on his model of Venus being ejected from its parent planet, claimed Jupiter would be a source of powerful radio signals. In 1955, astronomers discovered strong, non-thermal radio noise emanating from Jupiter. His detractors dismissed these correct predictions as lucky guesses. Perhaps Velikovsky's most profound idea was drawn from his own field of psychoanalysis. He proposed that humanity suffers from a form of collective amnesia. The catastrophes our ancestors witnessed were so terrifying that the memory has been collectively suppressed. Like an individual trauma victim, he argued, humanity has buried its most painful memory. The trauma remains, expressing itself in our propensity for violence, in our apocalyptic religions, and in the irrational resistance of the scientific establishment to any evidence that threatens to awaken the memory of what happened. For decades after the Velikovsky affair, catastrophism remained a forbidden topic. Then, a new generation of scientists began to re-examine the past with advanced technology. Deep-sea drilling platforms, polar ice cores, and precise radiocarbon dating all produced new data. Could these independent lines of evidence pinpoint a specific date for this ancient cataclysm? The physicist Paul Laviolette, analyzing ice cores from Greenland, found something that should not have been there: extremely high concentrations of iridium and cosmic dust. Iridium is an element rare on Earth but abundant in extraterrestrial objects like asteroids and comets. Its presence in a concentrated layer suggested a massive, sudden influx of cosmic material into the Earth's atmosphere. Laviolette called the source a, quote, galactic superwave, a volley of energy and dust from an explosion in the galactic core. Other researchers like D.S. Allen found corroborating evidence elsewhere. They pointed to deposits of aluminum-22, a radioactive isotope forged in supernovae at the edge of our solar system. They found evidence in ancient iron ore deposits of a sudden and violent reversal of the planet's magnetic polarity. All of these high-tech data points told the same story. Something immense, energetic, and of cosmic origin had struck the Earth in the recent past, triggering a catastrophe of planetary scale. As scientists from different disciplines compared their new data, a stunning convergence began to take place. The ice cores from Greenland, the sediment layers from the Caribbean, the magnetic data from ancient rocks, the carbon-dated evidence from the bone caves, they all pointed to a single, terrifying moment in time. The mass extinction of the great mammals of the Pleistocene, the mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and giant sloths, was an abrupt, almost instantaneous event. The end of the geological period known as the Younger Dryas, a brief return to Ice Age conditions, was shockingly swift. The climate data showed a sudden spike in global temperatures, a rise of 14 degrees Fahrenheit in as little as 15 years. The timeline was becoming clearer. The Ice Age had not slowly melted away. It had been violently terminated by a global cataclysm. And all the evidence for this event, the cosmic dust, the magnetic reversal, the mass extinction, the abrupt warming, pointed to a single date. Approximately 11,600 years ago, 9600 BCE. That is the date that modern science has pinpointed for the last great planetary catastrophe. And it is here that the story takes its most incredible turn. Because in 360 BCE, the Greek philosopher Plato wrote down the story of a great, advanced civilization that was destroyed in a single day and night of misfortune. He described a powerful island kingdom, a hub of culture and technology that was annihilated by violent earthquakes and floods. And the date he gave for the destruction of this lost civilization of Atlantis was 9,000 years before his own time. 9,000 years before 360 BCE is 9360 BCE, an almost perfect match. The convergence of the two timelines is specific. A story dismissed as a fable is corroborated by scientific data. Modern geological and astronomical research pinpointed a date for a global catastrophe that matches the date recorded by Plato more than 2,000 years earlier. This was the event. The end of a world. The great mammals were wiped from the planet. The climate was altered. The oceans rose, and the lands were inundated. Humanity, its burgeoning civilizations erased, was reduced to scattered bands of traumatized survivors, seeking refuge in the caves and high places of a newly hostile world. Civilization was reset to zero. This convergence of myth and science changes our understanding of the past. It suggests that the hundreds of ancient stories about a golden age destroyed by the heavens are not fiction. They are the fragmented, distorted, but fundamentally true memories of a real event. They are history. The existence of such a catastrophe implies that our species' journey is not the simple linear story we have been told. It is a story of cycles, of great heights and devastating falls. It suggests that before our own recorded history began, another chapter had already been written. A chapter about a sophisticated, global, prehistoric civilization, the one remembered in the legends of Atlantis, a civilization that was almost completely erased. The bone caves are the tombstone of a lost world. The erratics are not monuments to an ice age, but to a deluge. Plato was not writing a philosophical allegory. He was a historian, attempting to preserve the last fading memory of a world that once was, and of the year it was swallowed by the sea. Our past is longer, more dramatic, and far more mysterious than we have allowed ourselves to believe.